At the beginning of the story, we meet a boy named Sichi, who was considered ugly, clumsy, and disgusting, someone who lacked any respect from others. His life changes when he finds a magical fruit that grants him a secret ability that acts as a code, allowing him to instantly learn anything he needs. This gift transforms Sichi into the most powerful wizard in all fantasy worlds, and over time he becomes surrounded by several companions who follow him. But before reaching this point, Sichi was just a ridiculed boy, treated like a class clown, constantly mocked by people who thought themselves superior. One day, while he suffered yet another of these humiliations, a divine voice came over the school's PA system and announced that everyone would be transported to another world, as Earth was tired of failures and wanted to give them a chance to become useful as heroes elsewhere. This entity presented everything as if it were an RPG, with skills and classes, something that enchanted all the students. However, Sichi realized he was so insignificant that no one had even noticed his presence. Soon after, the god ordered the students to form groups. But Sichi ended up completely alone, as no one wanted him around. While begging to join a group, he was once again ridiculed, this time for the new evaluation abilities his classmates had received, calling him weak and mediocre. The humiliation reached the point where they compared him to a stinking animal. Through tears, Sichi watched the transfer to the other world begin. Only after everyone had disappeared did the god turn his attention to him and, feeling pity, decided to grant Sichi a secret ability before sending him to that hostile world. The first few days were difficult. Even in the jungle of this new world, Sichi couldn't adapt, barely able to walk or find food. When he was on the verge of starvation, he encountered a disgusting worm, and in a fit of desperation decided to devour it. Soon after, he found a strange fruit, and using his evaluation ability discovered it was called the Fruit of Evolution. The name didn't suggest any danger, so he decided to eat it. The taste was bitter and he almost vomited, but hunger prevailed, and he swallowed it all. Exploring further, he discovered that there were monkeys in the region with levels far above his, but he still decided to take the risk. He found more of the same fruit, and also a miraculous liquid that seemed to heal wounds, and stole them. Meanwhile, his schoolmates, including the student council president Kanazuki, gathered at the summoning point, worried about what had happened to Sichi, despite having never valued him. Now alone, Sichi found strange mushrooms, and without thinking, decided to eat one of them. The result was poisoning that left him near death. Even so, he decided to fulfill one last wish, to eat another evolution fruit, despite the bitter taste. To his surprise, the fruit cured the poison and even granted him new abilities. Before he could celebrate, a giant ape violently attacked him. Even using the miracle elixir, Sichi was easily defeated, but by accidentally defeating the creature, he received new items and abilities, as well as a strange message saying the evolution fruit had been activated. When he regained consciousness, he discovered that his body had changed drastically, as if he had undergone some miraculous training. He also received a set of new abilities and realized he was only at the first stage of evolution, which frustrated him when he realized he was still weak compared to level 120 monkeys. 5 months later, while searching for water, he was attacked by extremely strong wild wolves. Unexpectedly, he managed to defeat one of them and received new spells and items as a reward. He discovered mysterious areas of the map that he still intended to explore. But before that, another evolution was activated, leaving him paralyzed for hours. When he woke up, he was surrounded by monkeys, and faced with a huge pink gorilla, which turned out to be extremely powerful. Seichi tried to escape but was unsuccessful. After an exchange of blows, something unexpected happened. The gorilla, which was actually a female named Saria, was impressed that Seichi had withstood one of its punches and declared her love for him. To Seichi, this was complete madness, but Saria insisted he was special. Despite rejecting the idea, Seichi was eventually taken to her house. There, Saria demonstrated surprising skills by cooking delicious meals, far better than he could have imagined, which only increased his embarrassment. She began treating him like her husband, claiming they were already married, while he tried to argue that they were different species. Nothing could change Saria's mind. Amidst the confusion, Seichi realized he might be able to escape by exploring the secret area of the map he had discovered. However, Saria remained by his side the entire time, growing more and more insistent. When he asked why only she could speak while the other apes couldn't, she showed him a collection of books with various spells and tricks, many of them useful for everyday life. Seichi became even more confused and lost, while Saria began to think about what she would like to be called after marriage, insisting on affectionate nicknames. Desperate, Seichi's only thought was to find a way to escape this absurd situation. Sometime later, while Saria used her strength to fish, Seichi watched her and debated whether he should flee or continue accepting the company of a gorilla who treated him affectionately. His sanity told him to choose the former, and as he tried to discreetly move away, a huge spider appeared to threaten him. However, before he could react, Saria appeared and swatted the creature away, immediately asking if Seichi was okay. For the first time in his life, Seichi felt someone truly cared about him, and it struck him unexpectedly. Elsewhere, a thin, somber-looking man spoke of how he had lost faith in humanity and longed to be saved from its darkness. Later that day, Saria explained to Seichi that she was going on an exploration to find more evolutionary fruits, revealing that they allowed one to reach the pinnacle of the species when consumed in sufficient quantity. Just hearing the name reminded Seichi of his experiences of nausea while eating them, and wondered if these fruits could transform him into something completely different. Saria explained that she had already collected 9 fruits to offer to her future husband, but that someone had stolen them all. She said she would turn whoever did this to dust. Terrified, Seichi knelt and confessed that he had been responsible for eating the fruits. To his surprise, Saria didn't become angry, instead saying it was a sign that they were destined to be together. Seichi tried to argue, but Saria, in a fragile tone, asked if he hated her. He denied it, but she interpreted it as a confession of love, and even donned a wedding outfit that seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. Seichi once again despaired over the situation. Later, when Saria went hunting, Seichi smiled to himself and put an escape plan in motion. However, his attempt was interrupted when he realized Saria had run after him, quickly catching up. He entered a cave seeking refuge, but inside, he found the same thin man who spoke of his darkness. Upon seeing him, the man activated his energy and began to assess Seichi's strength. The young man realized he was facing Xenos, a powerful demon lord with a level above 1500. Xenos drew his sword and attacked, but before Seichi could be hit, Saria appeared and protected him. She was seriously injured, and Xenos himself, respecting the moment, retreated and watched from afar. Seichi despaired and asked Saria why she had sacrificed herself for someone as useless as him. Saria replied that she simply could not ignore her feelings. Seichi tried to use the miracle elixir to save her, but she said there was no turning back, that she could only speak thanks to a strength beyond logic. Through tears, Seichi lamented having been so ungrateful to her, and Saria, even weakened, affirmed that he had a good heart, and that he was the only one who suited her. Soon after, she closed her eyes. Xenos mocked Seichi, saying he couldn't win over any human girl, and so he clung to a gorilla. Overcome with rage, Seichi summoned his water magic, and attacked with all his might. Just when it seemed he stood no chance against the demon lord's immense power, Seichi rose again, fueled by the feeling of love, and launched a blow that improbably defeated Xenos. Before disappearing, Xenos thanked Seichi for showing him what true love was, and left behind a final gift. When Seichi ran to Saria, believing she had departed, something unexpected happened. Her body glowed and transformed into a young woman with a human appearance, beautiful and full of life. She stood up, smiled, and embraced Seichi. The transformation had been the result of Xenos' parting gift. Seichi was stunned, but also relieved and happy to see her alive in a new form. The two then found a treasure left by Xenos, containing clothes and a necklace. Seichi offered these items to Saria to wear. Soon after, he himself underwent a new transformation, acquiring a much more elegant, prince-like appearance. This change prompted Saria to promise to follow him to the ends of the earth. Seichi, in turn, decided to leave the forest and go to a town. At that moment, a strange creature named Sheepkun appeared, congratulating them on completing their first challenge and giving them rewards such as seeds and new clothes. He then teleported them both out of the forest. Hand in hand, Seichi and Saria walked toward the town. When they reached the gates, they were stopped by guards who asked for identification. After being tested with an artifact, they were able to pass. Soon after, they met Claude, who warned them not to enter the Adventurers Guild. Even so, Seichi decided to enter. Inside the guild, he and Saria encountered an eccentric group of people, and the guild master, an extravagant man who gave them a strange welcome but eventually allowed them to register. That's when they met Eris, a skilled receptionist who asked why Seichi wanted to become an adventurer. At that moment, Seichi remembered his school friends, especially Kanazuki, and thought he might find them if he followed that path. As he pondered, Saria reinforced that this was a good opportunity and convinced him to continue. Soon after, a group of shady-looking men entered the guild and tried to recruit Seichi for their team, but when they took him to their boss, he found himself in a strange and uncomfortable situation. Frightened and unsure how to handle it, Seichi hurriedly fled the place, not realizing that his true journey was just beginning. Seichi returned to the guild, and upon seeing Saria's beautiful face, felt renewed, before complaining to the guildmaster about the strange characters he encountered there. The man merely laughed, and replied that he wanted everyone to be themselves, then changed the subject to explain that Seichi and Saria would begin taking on low-level missions under the supervision of a B-class appraiser. Seichi expected to encounter only more eccentric people, but was soon surprised to meet Artoria, a high-level adventurer known for her fiery temper. Upon being introduced, Artoria grabbed Seichi by the collar and questioned the guildmaster about what made him believe they could survive his style of work. The proud guildmaster simply pointed to his muscles and said he trusted them, which ultimately convinced Artoria. She agreed to accompany them, and later, when the three of them departed together, Seichi tried to impress her by commenting on how beautiful he thought her smile was, causing the hardened warrior to blush. Seichi also complimented Artoria, but then decided not to feel like a burden on the group, and offered to babysit some children from the church. Seichi then asked Artoria why she worked in such a chaotic place like that guild, when she could be doing something better. She completely ignored him, and focused on helping a child who had injured his knee. But before she could finish, some boards fell on them. Seichi missed the opportunity to act as a savior, only to realize that Artoria had already taken care of the situation herself. Later, she took him to an abandoned building that was scheduled for demolition. Seichi destroyed the structure with a single punch, but was eventually buried under the rubble. Artoria despaired and began to cry, believing that his bad luck since childhood continued to harm everyone around him. However, Seichi soon got up, explaining that he had only suffered because he was too strong. Even so, Artoria grabbed him by the collar, lectured him on how he needed to protect himself, and blushing admitted she was glad he had survived. Meanwhile, the commander of the kingdom's army spoke to his subordinate about how he no longer wanted to see humans and demons unite, especially those young people from Earth. Seichi, back on his missions, suffered bad luck, even facing a dog that knocked him to the ground, while Artoria watched from afar and laughed. Elsewhere, a noblewoman commented curiously on Seichi's presence, only to blush when she realized how much attention he attracted. When the group completed their missions, they returned to the guild. The guildmaster presented them with a bag of coins as a reward, and recommended they rest. Eris, the receptionist, asked if they had a place to stay, and they realized they could no longer sleep outside. It was then that Artoria offered them lodging at her inn, and they readily accepted. The next day, Artoria asked Seichi and Saria to gather medicinal herbs in the forest as part of a practical test. Seichi rushed to the task without even listening to the instructions, and Saria accompanied him. Later, Saria returned with the correct herbs while Seichi returned only with suspicious mushrooms, showing no understanding. He explained that he was too strong to bother with simple tasks, but soon became frightened when Artoria gave him a stern scolding. As he returned to the forest, Seichi overheard ogres discussing plans for world domination. He approached, but the ogres introduced themselves as low-ranking subordinates of the Demon Lord. They summoned a stronger brother, who appeared and viciously attacked him. However, Seichi's luck intervened, allowing him to absorb the attack and return it. Thus, he defeated the larger ogre, sending the others fleeing in terror. Eventually, he returned with more herbs, but admitted to having no skill beyond his disproportionate strength. Artoria sighed and handed over her own herbs to help him, and they continued on to another mission. Meanwhile, a powerful demon scolded her subordinates for disobeying orders and going to the human realm. They explained that they had set teleportation traps to send enemy soldiers to the Black Dragon God's castle. She approved of the plan and rewarded them with a cruel look. Later, Seichi and Saria encountered the knight who resembled a classic hero again, but this time he was even more annoying, praising Artoria excessively and saying he was happy she'd found someone trustworthy. Ignoring the man, they continued hunting slimes in a nearby field. Saria struggled without much success, while Seichi pursued an enemy, but the slime disappeared after stepping on a magic circle. Artoria became suspicious and investigated, but ended up activating another circle, taking Seichi and Saria with her into an ancient castle. There, Artoria asked why they had followed her, and Seichi replied that he couldn't leave her alone. In response, she smiled and handed him an ancient stone that functioned as an artifact to indicate her location and would glow red if her life was in danger. Seichi was pleased with this, but before they could celebrate, a cave-in separated Artoria from the two. She cursed herself for her bad luck, while Seichi tried unsuccessfully to break through the wall. Artoria meanwhile faced an enemy inside the castle, and despite difficulty managed to defeat it. Seichi and Saria ended up in a strange room, where they found a suspicious chest. The object transformed into a living creature and attacked them. Seichi used his magic and defeated the creature, receiving as a reward a book that told the sad story of the chest, explaining how he had been rejected by humans and transformed into a monster. Saria felt sorry for the story, while Seichi examined the other items he had found, which included magic letters and a cursed ring that brought bad luck. He was disappointed, but Saria comforted him with kind words and reminded him that the stone Artoria had given him was glowing red. At that very moment, Artoria was led before a dragon, and the enemy before her cruelly asked if she had come here to be devoured. Artoria responded violently to the provocation, while the metallic enemy spread its wings. At that moment, Seichi and Saria began to panic, wondering how they could reach Artoria, who was probably already in danger. Seichi insisted on using his useless fists against the wall, while Artoria faced the dragon and used her final technique, opening the 8th gate, which consumed all her energy. At first, the dragon was overwhelmed by the powerful glow that emanated from her, but it soon put her in her place, defeating her with sharp blades and leaving her powerless. As Artoria found herself on the verge of death, she lamented not being able to see Seichi and Saria for the last time. The dragon prepared to finish her off, but the unexpected happened when Seichi appeared with his fire-resistant cloak and shielded her from the flames. Artoria realized she wouldn't die yet, and when she asked how they had managed to find her, Saria explained that Seichi had managed to break through sheer determination, breaking through the wall that had previously seemed insurmountable. Seichi left Artoria with Saria and advanced on the dragon to test his new abilities. The dragon began by insulting his humanity and then released devastating flames in an attempt to burn him. Seichi barely resisted and realized he was facing an enemy far more powerful than any he had ever faced. Assessing the dragon's power level, he discovered it was over 5,000. With that, he realized the battle would be nearly impossible. Even so, Seichi tried to dodge the attacks, but the dragon used its ability to trap him in midair and slammed him violently against the cave wall with its tail. Seichi fell to the ground in slow motion, wondering why his luck wasn't working against this enemy. The dragon then concentrated its energy into an immense fireball to destroy him once and for all. At that moment, Seichi reminded Seichi of the water magic he had used in a previous fight. Seichi summoned his magic dagger and unleashed a torrent that flooded the area, hitting the dragon with water for the first time in centuries. The dragon became enraged, but when he tried to trap Seichi again, he discovered that the young man had acquired resistance to that ability. With that, Seichi advanced and managed to seriously wound the dragon, dividing it and ending the battle. The dragon lamented losing to a human for the first time, but fell defeated. After the fight, Seichi ran to Seichi and embraced him, both celebrating their victory, until they realized they had no idea how to return home. Seichi checked his acquired rewards and found an orb that seemed to increase his powers. He immediately consumed it, strengthening himself even further, and then chose a new cloak, which left Seichi even more impressed. Just then Sheepkun appeared, congratulated Seichi on completing another dungeon, and even modified his appearance with a new hairstyle before opening a dimensional portal for them to return. Artoria explained that she carried an absurdly negative fortune, millions at a disadvantage, which caused disasters to haunt her forever. Seichi commented on this curiously, and even Seichi agreed with the strangeness. At the guild, the master continued to train his muscles while Eris searched for information about them. Artoria realized that despite her problems, she was well liked, but ran away embarrassed. Seichi immediately followed her, leaving Seichi behind. Meanwhile, the Demon Queen harshly reprimanded her subordinates for the defeat and death of the Black Dragon. The atmosphere was heavy, and her voice echoed with authority as she questioned how such a powerful creature had been defeated so unexpectedly. In her mind, the question arose as to who could have been responsible for such a deed, and this uncertainty made her uneasy, as it was clear that someone with immense power was behind it. On the other side, in a completely different scenario, Seichi had a reunion with the noblewoman he had met earlier in the market. She seemed quite interested in bringing him closer to Artoria, demonstrating an encouraging attitude and clearly encouraging him to confess his love to the warrior. The noblewoman's words remained engraved in his mind, and he decided to follow her advice. Armed with the magical locator stone, Seichi used the artifact to find Artoria and soon located her. The two had a moment alone, in which Artoria, contrary to her usual demeanor, revealed a fragile and vulnerable side, making it clear that she was seeking recognition and validation. Seichi, interpreting what he had heard from the noblewoman literally, approached her firmly and embraced her from behind. The unexpected gesture deeply moved Artoria, and tears welled up in her eyes. As she cried, Seichi declared with conviction that he would always be by her side. He didn't consider how those words might put him in a delicate position regarding Saria, who was waiting for him at that moment, unaware of what was happening. Artoria was deeply touched by that gesture and the words she heard. It was at that moment that Seichi placed the unlucky ring on her finger, explaining that it had the ability to transform negativity into positive energy. Embarrassed and unable to cope with the flood of feelings that invaded her, Artoria hurriedly fled, while Seichi, watching her, began to realize that perhaps he had gained another companion without realizing it. Artoria, for her part, wondered confusedly what was happening to her own heart and why she was reacting this way. The next morning, over breakfast, Seichi seemed upset and complained to Saria that Artoria had been avoiding him since the previous day. He then asked if she would spend the day with him. Saria calmly explained that she intended to dedicate that day to caring for the church children, something that occupied her attention and also brought her joy. Feeling he wouldn't have her company, Seichi decided to seek information on his own. First, he sought out the guildmaster, but the guildmaster only showed him magazines about physical training and supplements, which offered nothing to his needs. Then he turned to Eris, but she brought heavy books containing eccentric and bizarre practices, leaving Seichi frustrated and without concrete answers. In the end, both the guildmaster and Eris mentioned a summoning of heroes in a neighboring kingdom. The master also gave him a map, and recommended that he seek out the royal library to learn more about the matter. While this information was circulating, in the neighboring kingdom, the king was in despair over the possibility of the demon lord's resurrection. The monarch questioned his advisor, fearing that if the heroes they had summoned weren't strong enough, there would be no way to survive the threat. The counselor, seeking a solution, suggested that the heroes be sent as exchange students to a magic academy in another realm, where they could be controlled through ancient incantations. For his part, Seichi devoted himself to books and studies. He first immersed himself in the world's political and historical volumes, but soon realized he couldn't trust what he read, as the works consistently portrayed humans as noble and just, while demons were one-sidedly described as cruel and monstrous. Dissatisfied with this distorted view, he abandoned this line of study and decided to delve into the books of magic. With his unusual skill, he learned all the material in one sitting and realized that once again, he was becoming even more powerful. Meanwhile, Saria enjoyed her time caring for the children and had more fun than ever, showing genuine joy in her small tasks. Later, Seichi encountered a young woman with animal ears who sold her paintings at very low prices, a reflection of her low self-esteem and lack of confidence in her own talent. Moved, he purchased one of her works, leaving her moved and grateful. Soon after, he was drawn by the aroma of an upscale cafe tucked away in a quiet corner. Upon entering, he expected to find something different, but found only two gentlemen peacefully enjoying a meal. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Artoria was lost in thoughts and daydreams about Seichi, until a wealthy friend found her. This friend took her home and reminded her that she had received a ring symbolizing eternal love, bringing back memories of the moment Seichi had given her the unlucky ring. Meanwhile, Seichi, sitting in the cafe, enjoyed the food and ended up meeting a man named Ranz. During the conversation, Ranz asked him about his love life. Seichi, without reflecting on the importance of privacy, openly revealed that he was torn between two partners. It was then that he discovered something alarming. In that kingdom, offering a ring to a woman was a gesture that meant promising eternal love, and failing to fulfill that promise could have serious consequences. At that moment, Seichi realized the gravity of the situation he had gotten himself into, and how his actions could end up hurting Saria, who trusted him without knowing the mess he was in. Seichi's love advisor told him that he should marry both of them, and if he couldn't, he should be honest with them and stop acting frivolously. With this advice, Seichi set out, determined to resolve his situation. At that very moment, the kingdom's strongest soldier appeared to fetch Ranz, who was secretly someone very important. Later, as Seichi considered how he could be honest with Saria while simultaneously quelling his desire to get closer to Artoria, he found himself in front of the church. Just as he was about to enter to find Saria, Artoria suddenly appeared and kissed him before he could even explain that the ring he had given her had no real meaning. Artoria already knew the gift was almost out of pity for her bad luck, but she was still willing to accept it and get closer to Seichi. He in turn couldn't reject her when she asked if she wasn't good enough, and suggested he didn't have to choose just one. At that moment, Saria appeared and caught them in front of the church. Seichi panicked and tried to find an excuse, but Saria surprised him by telling him he should accept Artoria's feelings. Seichi was in disbelief until Saria explained that by nature many women gravitated towards strong men, and since there were few of them, she was already prepared to share her mate. In tears of joy at this naivete, Seichi turned to Artoria and kissed her back, promising never to make her regret that day. Later, Seichi's friends congratulated him on winning over two women at once, something that had seemed impossible to them. The next day, Seichi and Saria were having breakfast when the guildmaster appeared, making strange comments that made them both uncomfortable. When Seichi complained, the master gave him an address, telling him to look for a horse. Following the advice, Seichi went to the indicated location and realized he might need a new companion, since the other two were far away. At the stable, the merchant asked if he wanted a horse for the upcoming Royal Cup, a race with no rules featuring horse-like creatures, but Seichi knew nothing about it. The merchant talked persistently about his dragon horses, which were popular but also admitted to selling counterfeit paper as part of a scam. Among the animals was a proud mule that refused to be treated as a mere mount and even kicked the merchant when he tried to touch her. Seichi was surprised when he suddenly understood her language. The mule, named Lulun, displayed arrogance despite being kept in a simple stable. When she realized Sichi could understand her, she tested her strength against him. But Sichi easily restrained her. Recognizing his superiority, she knelt before him and accepted him as her master. Sichi then decided to buy her. Later, when he took her to the city, he shared some street food with her, which made Lulin wonder if he was some kind of generous messenger from heaven. At that moment, Sichi again encountered the young mixed-race woman named Mei, who was being criticized by a man who said she should compete instead of wasting her talent selling cheap paintings. Sichi intervened, and Mei recognized him as the one who had previously purchased one of her works. The critic, a nobleman named Clay, offered Sichi one of his own paintings to buy, but the work was nothing more than a simple drawing. Sichi refused, and Clay tried to impress him by revealing his name and status, but none of this affected Sichi. Mei still resisted the idea of competing until Sichi told her he would participate in the Royal Cup himself, and that, if he won, she would have to compete in the art competition. Upon hearing that the fifth prize in the race was the tastiest fish in the world, Lulin decided she had to win. When the competition began, one of the kingdom's Valkyries, Lorna, announced the prizes. Second place would be awarded photographs of their captain, and first place would allow them to spend a whole day with the Valkyries. Sichi and Lulin were terrified by the prospect of winning, and vowed to avoid the top spots. The race began, and Lulin shot to the front, but soon lost strength. Having missed breakfast, Sichi resolved the situation by offering her an evolutionary fruit, which restored her energy and enabled her to assume an even more powerful form. Thanks to this, Lulin easily defeated her opponents, who eventually gave up, and she and Sichi unintentionally took first place. While Surya and Artoria grew even more enchanted with Sichi, Mei finally decided to participate in the art competition. After the race, Lulin transformed into a sphere of light, and took the form of a young woman. When Surya and Artoria entered Sichi's room, they found Lulin hugging him and calling him master, sparking immediate jealousy. Artoria, suspicious that Sichi was already acquiring another companion, attacked him before he could explain. Recovered, Sichi revealed that Lulin was the mule transformed after eating the fruit of evolution. Artoria doubted it, but Surya proved the truth by showing her own transformation. Even so, Artoria was shaken to realize she was in love with someone so eccentric. Too smitten to back down, she took Lulin to a store and bought her simple clothes. Sichi praised her, even though the outfit was tight and ill-fitting. Just then, the doors opened and two new women appeared. One was Lorna, from the Royal Cup, and the other was Claudia, linked to the king. Claudia asked Sichi to hold out his hands, and just when he thought he was about to receive another ring, she handcuffed him and dragged him away. Meanwhile, the demon goddess Leia strode boldly into a private meeting of the demon army's generals. The atmosphere was tense, and at the center was Lucia, the demon lord's daughter, accompanied by Kraze, an ally known for his arrogance and impulsive behavior. Before everyone, Lucia firmly declared her intention to form an alliance with the human king, something unexpected to many present. Leia reinforced her decision, explaining that she had performed a ritual to summon the soul of the ancient black dragon, and that during this encounter she had discovered that a human named Sichi had defeated the creature in fair combat. Leia's words surprised some of the generals, but Kraze rose in protest. He stated that humans had already been responsible for his father's destruction in the past, and that alliances with them could not be trusted. Tensions rose in the hall, but before Kraze could dwell on his indignation, he was harshly rebuked by the other generals, who warned him never again to disrespect Lucia, daughter of the demon lord. Faced with pressure, Kraze remained silent, even though deep down he continued to harbor plans of betrayal and ruin for everyone present. In the end, most of the generals decided to support Lucia, accepting the idea of continuing the alliance. Meanwhile, Sichi, to his utter dismay, was reminded by Lorna that by winning the Royal Cup, he had earned the right to spend an entire day with the Valkyries. Claudia removed his handcuffs and introduced him to Louise, the strongest among them, who approached without hesitation. Instead of extending her hand in greeting, Louise handed Sichi a sword, challenging him to face her in combat. At another point in the story, Kanazuki and her group were attacked by enemies at the new academy, who believed they could conquer or bend her to their will. However, Kanazuki demonstrated her strength and skill, quickly defeating them all and making it clear that neither allies nor rivals could approach her disrespectfully. Now at the royal palace, Louise faced Sichi in a duel. She carefully watched his every move as she attempted to strike him with sword blows, but Sichi dodged effortlessly, as if it were a simple task. The more he dodged, the more impressed Louise was by his reactions. When she realized none of her attacks were working, she decided to use her ultimate technique, concentrating all her power into a single strike. Yet Sichi instinctively managed to dodge again, gaining inexplicable advantages that left everyone confused. The most unexpected moment occurred when Louise lost her sword to someone who had never declared himself a swordsman. The surrounding women were shocked, unable to comprehend how such a thing could have happened. Cixi, as surprised as the others, barely had time to react when Louise knelt before him and asked to be accepted into their group. Before he could respond, Claudia intervened and took him aside for a private conversation. At that very moment, a dangerous young woman silently followed the king through the corridors, wielding a blade and waiting for her opportunity to act. During the conversation, Claudia revealed Louise's story to Cixi. She explained that she had been born into an extremely wealthy family, raised in luxury, and achieved extraordinary strength. Yet despite everything, Louise always ended up feeling alone. Shortly after, Louise herself entered with her companions and confirmed part of the story. She said she had never met anyone who could match her in power, except for a dark warrior known as the Black Paladin, until Cixi appeared. She admitted she disliked being treated like an idol, and thanked Cixi for, in a way, freeing her from her loneliness. Claudia was moved to tears upon hearing those words, and Louise embraced her with teary eyes, while Cixi silently watched the touching scene. At that moment, screams from the king's chambers interrupted their conversation. The Valkyries quickly headed toward the royal chamber, and Cixi followed them, curious and concerned. However, when he tried to enter, he was prevented from entering, claiming he shouldn't get involved in royal affairs. This made him silently question why they had called him a savior, if he had no right to act in situations like this. Cixi refused to move away, and used his special vision to see beyond the closed doors. It was then that he realized the assassin was precisely the young woman he had seen earlier. Her name was Oliga, a slave trained from an early age to kill without hesitation. She advanced on him with impressive speed, almost impossible to keep up with. Cixi remained firmly in place, waiting for her approach and taunting her to attract her attention. In response, Oliga threw daggers at him, but Cixi managed to catch them in mid-air with precision. Instantly, her automatic defense deflected the weapons back at her, pinning her against the wall and revealing the danger of the situation. Oliga then dropped her cloak, revealing feline ears, and continued attacking with her blades. Cixi dodged for a while, but tired of the chase, he knocked her down. He wondered why such a small young woman had such a cruel task. Louise arrived soon after with the other Valkyries, and even though she didn't believe Oliga was the killer, Lorna took it upon herself to interrogate her. Claudia, eccentrically, boasted that she had already mastered all the books written by Eris, and applied her methods, while Cixi tried to dispel the strange thoughts that were surfacing in his mind. Louise soon explained that Oliga had used a cursed dagger against the king, putting him into a deep coma that could not be undone by magic. Cixi wondered if he could use his luck to solve the problem, and decided to visit the sleeping king. To his surprise, he discovered that the king was Ranz in disguise. He also noticed a strange pattern appearing on his arm, but he didn't know how to deal with it. At that moment, Florio, Louise's younger brother, appeared, introducing himself as a doctor, but confessing to being unable to cure the king. He asked Cixi to use his powers to help. Under pressure from everyone, Cixi decided to try to create magic from scratch, even though he didn't know how. Halfway through the attempt, he realized he had no idea what he was doing, but surprisingly, his improvisation worked, and he created a neutralization spell. Ranz immediately awoke, recognized Cixi and tried to thank him, but was interrupted by the women who surrounded him in celebration. Later, Ranz asked Cixi what he wanted as a reward, and he simply asked for time to think. That night, the two shared a bath, and Ranz shared his greatest dream, to open public baths across the country so everyone could relax together. Meanwhile, Louise was being tended to by Lorna, who tended to her injured back, and the two discussed Cixi, praising his choice to request training at the castle instead of riches as a reward. Elsewhere, Saria and Artoria were relaxing in a bathhouse, and Artoria made no secret of her jealousy, believing Cixi must be involved with another woman. Saria, however, naively saw it as natural, thinking Cixi was simply irresistible. Meanwhile, Cixi listened to Ranz talk about his desire to see humans and demons living in harmony, even sharing baths. At the castle, the king and his magician were in their quarters when they received a visit from General Zakia, who had come to them seeking direct answers about the whereabouts of the recently summoned heroes. The general, known for his discipline and seriousness, wanted to know exactly where the young men had been sent and how they would be used. The king, with his usual arrogance, explained that they had been transported to the kingdom's magic academy, where they were to undergo rigorous training until they became soldiers capable of useful service. Zakia was dissatisfied with the explanation, as she suspected the intention behind the decision. But before she could start any argument or express her dissatisfaction, an arrow flew through the window with impressive speed, aimed directly at the king. The general, with his experience and reflexes, easily intercepted the projectile, preventing the monarch from being hit. Even so, the king and the magician, instead of showing gratitude, coldly ordered Zakia to immediately pursue the culprit, as if it were just another duty he must fulfill. While this tension unfolded inside the castle, Seichi's group finally arrived at the royal gates. The meeting, however, did not begin peacefully. Overcome by obvious jealousy, Artoria accused Seichi of betraying Saria, which caused immediate discomfort. Saria, however, firmly denied the accusations, making it clear that there was no basis for such suspicions. Shortly thereafter, Louise rushed towards Seichi, and only when Artoria recognized the visitor's identity did her fury begin to subside. The situation became even more delicate when Florio, upon spotting Saria, was struck by her beauty, and wondered how Seichi, someone who appeared to have no remarkable qualities, had acquired such an attractive companion. His surprise was further heightened when he discovered that Seichi was not only with Saria, but also with other partners. From that moment on, Florio began to see Seichi as a kind of romantic advisor, someone from whom he could learn lessons for his own life. In another part of the castle, Lorna prepared to interrogate Olga, who had finally regained consciousness after her failed mission. When none of the usual methods of questioning seemed to work, Lorna decided to resort to her secret trick to try to make her relent. At that moment, Seichi, intrigued by the scene and wondering where this seemingly emotionless outcome would lead them, witnessed Lorna begin a cruel provocation. She began to enjoy the meal in front of Olga, who was fighting her own hunger and trying in vain to control her salivation. Lorna promised to share the food if Olga revealed what she knew. But before anything could be said, Seichi entered the room and interrupted everything. His peculiar sense of justice manifested itself again, and he reprimanded Lorna for not sharing the meal with Olga, completely ignoring the fact that the prisoner had attempted to assassinate the king moments before. Shortly afterward, Louise entered the room and declared that Lorna would go without dinner that night, which left her companion visibly shaken. Later, master and servant ended up feeding Olga, not out of compassion, but simply because Seichi longed to hear a young woman call him big brother. After the meal, Louise explained that the necklace Olga wore around her neck held a submissive spell, transforming her into a faithful servant to whoever cast the spell. Seichi, intrigued, asked why they couldn't simply remove it. To respond, Olga grabbed the necklace and showed him the painful electrical reaction she experienced whenever she tried to resist the spell, making it clear that liberation was not a simple matter. Meanwhile, the corrupt king and magician were secretly plotting, planning to force Olga to take her own life as punishment for her failed assassination mission. Meanwhile, Zakia recalled her encounter the night before with the real assassin who had attempted to kill the king. He was a man consumed by hatred, who had lost his beloved after soldiers of the kingdom killed her for being a demon. This man, consumed by a desire for revenge, questioned Zakia, asking why someone so capable continued to serve such a corrupt king, insinuating that her loyalty was limited to money. Zakia responded by raising the new sword she had purchased with her bonus from her last paycheck and advancing on the enemy. The man, however, fled before the blow could reach him, and Zakia remained alone, reflecting on his own choices and the weight of his loyalty to an unworthy monarch. Back at the palace, Seichi attempted to manifest a power capable of breaking the spell on Olga's necklace. All that came to mind, however, was the word freedom, accompanied by a confusing and strange image. To his surprise, the manifestation worked, and an unexpected figure appeared, freeing Olga from the necklace that imprisoned her. Upon realizing she was free, she broke down in tears, sobbing until Saria comforted her. When she managed to compose herself, she told her tragic story, marked by a cruel fate. She revealed that she had been born into unfavorable conditions, imprisoned along with others of her race, and lost her mother, taken away, never to return. Since then, she had been forced to become an assassin, spending years reaping lives without remorse. Even now, in the midst of an attempt at redemption, she still felt her hands stained with blood. Seichi seized the opportunity, took her hands, and asked her to call him older brother from that moment on. Olga agreed, accepting the symbolic relationship. Soon after, Saria intervened and suggested that Olga join the group. Seichi accepted the idea, believing that everyone's naivety would still be enough to prevent the king from condemning them for harboring a murderer. Meanwhile, the villains were plotting from afar, exchanging messages through archaic devices and preparing to send powerful creatures to destroy Seichi's homeland. At the castle, Louise approached with her plants and asked Seichi if he would be responsible for caring for the king in her absence. Seichi demanded to know where she was going, and was informed that a demonic army was advancing on the kingdom's borders, and that Louise's former mentor, the Black Paladin, had summoned the Valkyries to fight alongside him. Relieved that this wasn't a trivial mission, Seichi agreed to take on the king's guard and bid farewell to the group of warriors. The next day, Florio took over as Seichi's teacher and attempted to teach him better control of his magic. Although already possessing excessive power, Seichi sought discipline, but the attempt was futile, and he once again suffered from a lack of control over his excessive strength. At that moment, two acquaintances appeared, accompanied by Barnabas, a legendary magician. Seichi didn't recognize the man, but Florio was deeply moved, as he was the president of this master's fan club. Eagerly, he showed off his book collection and asked for an autograph, but Barnabas, already overcome with age, barely remembered how to sign. The group then continued on to meet Ronz, who now wore elaborate attire befitting his position. Johnny Bravo took the opportunity to show off the unique cultivation he had been carefully tending and greet his old friend. The king in turn expressed admiration for Johnny Bravo's impressive muscles, while Eris, in her eccentric way, displayed strange objects as a sign of respect. Seichi, faced with all this, simply blushed in silence. When Barnabas approached, Ronz immediately knelt before his former master, asking for a comfortable chair. Eris provided one, albeit dubiously, but Barnabas accepted without hesitation, happy to see his disciple again. After moments of distraction, they finally discussed the real problem. Barnabas revealed that Kanazuki and his companions continued to be isolated by a vast plot, and he feared that since the summoning of these heroes, only more trouble had arisen. Their conversation was interrupted by a soldier who brought alarming news that an army of over 5,000 monsters was marching towards the capital. Meanwhile, Louise and the Valkyries met with the Black Paladin, who looked more like a war machine than a sorcerer, and together they faced the endless horde of creatures. In the capital, the guild prepared for the confrontation. Saria, with her frail arms, worried Seichi, who doubted her ability to fight. Lulun feared that if the city were destroyed, she would die without food. Olga, on the other hand, showed more interest in her new life, and asked Seichi to give her a pat on the back if she managed to defeat more monsters than the others. He replied that he wanted to see her to safety first, as he couldn't do that if she didn't survive. The remaining guild members prepared their weapons and unique abilities to face the enemy. Johnny Bravo charged the monsters and defeated them with powerful blows. Eris struck with precision, transforming enemies into fragments. Another warrior used unusual tricks to launch attacks, and a different group used magical techniques to annihilate parts of the horde. In the midst of the combat, a giant high-level lion appeared, but the butler-turned-assassin deftly cut it down, impressing everyone. Saria unleashed the strength of her fists to defeat enormous monsters, while Artoria summoned ice to freeze and shatter her enemies, catching Barnabas's attention. Inspired, the old wizard also demonstrated his power, conjuring magical storms to exterminate more creatures than anyone else. However, as everyone began to celebrate, they discovered that a new group of enemies had been sent their way and would arrive soon to truly test them. This time, even higher-ranked monsters were on their way, and Seichi finally decided to use his full array of tricks to prove himself, attempting to create a spell capable of dispersing all enemies while protecting his friends. He summoned a Statue of Liberty and enveloped her in lightning, but this time his luck failed, and he fell to his knees declaring he would create another great feat, only to fail in the end. Just when he had given up hope, another unexpected outcome occurred, and the statue transformed into a Thor-like figure, hurling lightning at all the monsters and turning them to ash. Everyone celebrated the victory, while Seichi suffered once again from the burden of accumulating countless abilities and the trauma of being too strong, until Olga appeared with her feline ears and asked him to stroke her head. This gesture was enough to alleviate his discouragement, but soon Barnabas unexpectedly assumed a young form and asked Seichi to stroke his head as well, causing him lasting trauma. Realizing that Seichi had no interest in this transformation, Barnabas returned to his normal appearance and asked him to become a teacher at his magic academy. Seichi refused, saying he couldn't abandon his companions to live a simple, low-paid life. Knowing exactly how to convince him, Barnabas suggested he imagine Saria dressed as a student, Artoria as a stern headmistress, Lulun as an acrobatic champion, and Olga as a delicate maid. Faced with such a vivid description, Seichi couldn't resist and accepted the proposal. The following days passed quickly, with Seichi taking each of his companions on extended dates. Lulun took him on a food-only outing, while Artoria finally began wearing proper clothing, putting an end to the previous awkward situation. When it was Saria's turn, Seichi hoped to spend some time alone, but she brought Olga along, which thwarted his plans. Even so, he didn't mind, as he considered it better to have two companions than just one. Later, when he was finally alone with Saria, he thanked her for accepting all his choices, and told her he loved her. She was moved, and they almost kissed, but Olga interrupted again, calling him a bad boyfriend. Sometime later, Seichi visited Mei's painting competition accompanied by all her companions. Mei presented a portrait of him, mounted on Lulun, and revealed that he had saved her career and made her his greatest admirer. This embarrassed Seichi in front of everyone. When the group returned to the royal palace, Louise and her companions returned from their mission against monsters and bid Seichi farewell after learning he had been chosen to teach at the Magic Academy. Meanwhile, the charred remains of the enemies Seichi defeated were rebuked by the Demon Lord, who at the time was nothing more than a shadow of himself. A few days later, Seichi and his group set off for the Magic Academy, relieved to finally be away from the chaos he'd been facing. He thanked his companions for staying by his side and looked forward to a fresh start, with the chance to meet new people and leave his previous antics behind. However, his worst nightmare came to fruition, when a stranger, comparable to a small insect, appeared in his carriage, proclaiming himself the hero of victory and making it clear that Sichi would never be free from eccentric figures. Thus came another part of Sichi's turbulent life in this new world. And here's the end of the story. Like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more.